Abraham Lincoln, a name synonymous with leadership, resilience, and profound moral vision. As the 16th President of the United States, he led the nation through its darkest hours during the Civil War, a time when the very fabric of America was stretched thin by division and conflict. Yet, amid this turbulence, Lincoln emerged not only as a political leader but as a master of persuasion and unity, whose ability to communicate, connect, and influence changed the course of history. To understand why Lincoln's leadership remains so vital and instructive today, we must first appreciate the world he navigated, a nation fractured by competing interests, ideologies, and fears. His presidency began in 1861, at a moment when the United States teetered on the brink of dissolution. What made Lincoln's leadership extraordinary was not just his policies or military decisions but his unparalleled talent for persuasion, a skill rooted in his deep understanding of how to speak to people's hearts and minds, even amid profound disagreement. It was this capacity for connection that enabled him to hold a divided Union together and ultimately abolish the institution of slavery. Lincoln's rise to prominence coincided with remarkable advancements in communication technology, including the widespread use of photography. He was the first president to be extensively photographed, appearing in countless images distributed broadly across the country. These photographs, coupled with symbolic artistic portrayals like the iconic rail splitter image and the painting depicting his youthful blend of labor and learning, helped craft a public persona that was both relatable and inspiring, a self-made, intellectual common man who could bridge social divides. This intuitive grasp of messaging through visual media marked an early understanding of how leaders can shape their narrative to resonate with diverse audiences. But Lincoln's mastery went far beyond images. At the core of his persuasive power was an extraordinary blend of storytelling, logic, and empathy, the three pillars that defined his leadership style. Unlike many politicians of his time who relied on lofty rhetoric, Lincoln spoke in plain language accessible to common people. He understood that clarity and simplicity breed trust and foster connection. More importantly, he used stories, parables, and anecdotes as powerful rhetorical tools to help the nation grapple with complex and painful issues. By framing debates about liberty, justice, and slavery in relatable narratives, he gently guided public sentiment away from emotional backlash toward thoughtful reflection and understanding. Consider, for example, his famous parable, The Wolf and the Sheep, delivered during a speech in 1864. Through this story, Lincoln reframed the concept of liberty in a way that illuminated the stark moral divide at the heart of the Civil War without direct confrontation. He positioned the enslaved people as the sheep seeking true freedom, contrasting their plight against the wolves who sought to dominate others. Framing such a toxic, divisive issue through story created a neutral medium, allowing listeners to engage emotionally and intellectually without immediate defensiveness. This use of storytelling as a safety valve, both for Lincoln himself and his audience, illustrates how narrative can be a bridge in times of conflict. Lincoln's legal background sharpened his logical reasoning and ability to craft airtight arguments. His celebrated debates with Senator Stephen Douglas exemplified his skill in combining moral clarity with rigorous logic. He famously declared that a house divided against itself cannot stand, succinctly capturing the unsustainability of a nation half slave and half free. This logical premise underpinned his moral and political stance, making a compelling case that slavery's continued existence threatened the very foundation of American democracy. The Gettysburg Address, though brief, remains a masterpiece of persuasive rhetoric. Lincoln wove ethos, pathos, and logos seamlessly, justifying the sacrifices of the Civil War by reaffirming the nation's founding ideals of equality and liberty. With remarkable precision, he structured his speech like a legal argument, stating facts, defining the issue, and presenting a solemn call to honor the fallen by committing to the cause of freedom and unity. His repetitive phrasing grounded abstract ideals in the real soil of the battlefield, connecting listeners viscerally to the shared purpose of the struggle. This attention to framing and his dedication to language highlighted Lincoln's belief that words shape reality and that changing public opinion was key to changing the nation's destiny. Perhaps what truly set Lincoln apart was his extraordinary empathy. He possessed a small d democratic humility and a finely tuned ear for public sentiment. He deliberately spoke in simple terms to ensure his messages reached all Americans, not just elites. His empathy extended even to his political opponents. He refrained from personal attacks and sought to understand their perspectives deeply. This sensitivity enabled him to forecast opposing views with uncanny accuracy and to reshape debates by repositioning arguments rather than attacking individuals. Whether responding to critics through public letters or engaging with a skeptical populace, Lincoln consistently built trust through respect, humility, and listening. Navigating the Civil War meant confronting immense conflict and dissent. Lincoln faced secessionist sympathies in border states, bitter political factionalism, and fierce opposition to his policies. His strategy was adaptable and pragmatic, sometimes conciliatory, sometimes firm, and always grounded in a desire to preserve both the Union and the nation's moral compass. His approach to managing dissent included avoiding resentment, encouraging disagreement among his advisors, and taking personal responsibility for failures. These qualities fostered a culture of open discourse and accountability, demonstrating leadership's power to transform adversarial relationships into productive dialogue. Lincoln's legacy offers a timeless blueprint for leaders today. His life teaches us that persuasion is not about dominance or rhetoric alone, but about forging connection through empathy, clarity, and integrity. It reminds us to craft narratives that resonate deeply, to frame our messages with care and purpose, and to build arguments grounded in both fact and shared values. His leadership shows us the importance of humility, humor, and self-awareness, qualities that enable us to face division and difficulty without losing sight of our higher goals. As we embark on this exploration of Abraham Lincoln, the master persuader and unifier, we aim to uncover the strategies behind his remarkable influence. The lessons gleaned from his life are not relics of a bygone era, but practical tools for anyone seeking to lead with conviction, communicate with impact, and unite in times of division. Lincoln's story challenges us to rise above cynicism and partisanship, to wield persuasion as a force for progress and unity, and to embody the timeless values that sustain a just and free society. In the episodes to come, we will dive deep into the historical context of Lincoln's presidency, dissect the pillars of his persuasive leadership, analyze landmark speeches like the Gettysburg Address, and reveal how his empathy and framing crafts shaped a nation's destiny. Along the way, we will uncover actionable leadership principles that remain profoundly relevant for today's leaders and listeners committed to personal and societal growth. Join us in this journey to learn from one of history's greatest leaders, the man who held a divided nation together through the power of persuasion, empathy, and unwavering vision. The legacy of Abraham Lincoln is not just history. It is an enduring guide for all who seek to lead with heart, mind, and courage. When Abraham Lincoln stepped into the presidency in 1861, America was a nation on the brink, fractured by deep divisions and teetering towards civil war. But beyond the monumental challenges of governance and Union preservation, Lincoln's era also marked a fascinating turning point in how public figures shaped their images and communicated with the masses. Unlike his predecessors, Lincoln was the first American president to be extensively photographed. This was not just a technological novelty. It transformed how leaders connected with citizens, and in Lincoln's case, it was a deliberate and innovative part of his persuasive leadership. In the mid-19th century, photography was undergoing rapid advancement. The development of multilens cameras and reproductions from glass negatives made it possible to produce mass quantities of images quickly and cheaply. Lincoln sat for photographs on dozens of occasions, and these images could be widely distributed, in the form of cartes de visite, small, tough prints exchanged like calling cards, and stereographs, which created a three-dimensional effect. For the first time in history, the public could see a consistent, widely recognized visual representation of their leader, not just in paintings or statues, but in photographs carried personally or displayed publicly. Yet this visual proliferation was more than just a novel means of sharing Lincoln's likeness. It was a strategic tool that shaped his public persona in a way that aligned perfectly with his political and cultural messaging. Paintings like Morgan Rees's Youth of Lincoln pictured him as a young man outdoors, reading by the light of day, axe in hand, a symbolic image blending his reputation as a rugged frontiersman with that of a thoughtful intellectual. This image was reinforced by the persistent rail splitter brand, emphasizing Lincoln's humble origins and his self-made rise, resonating deeply in a nation that valued hard work, perseverance, and intellectual aspiration. By circulating these images widely, Lincoln, or those close to him, firmly established his identity as both a committed laborer and an accessible, intellectual commoner. This carefully crafted public narrative made him relatable to diverse segments of the population, from farmers and laborers to emerging urban professionals, fostering a sense of trust and kinship. It was an early form of political branding that demonstrated an intuitive grasp of how media shapes public perception, long before the age of radio, television, or social media. The implications of this effort were profound. In an era when social divides were sharp and political trust precarious, being seen as a man of the people was essential to building broad support. Lincoln's visual story reassured citizens across the spectrum that he understood their struggles and values, not just through words, but through imagery that conveyed authenticity and shared identity. His face, captured repeatedly in photographs and evocative portraits, became a symbol of unity and the possibility of progress forged by honest labor and thoughtful leadership. This early use of media as a tool for self-representation set a foundation for Lincoln's persuasive power throughout his presidency. He understood that persuasion began not just with spoken or written words, but with the entire narrative humans told about a leader, what they saw and believed about his character. By shaping his image as an everyman intellectual committed to self-improvement, Lincoln created a potent narrative that made his appeals for unity, justice, and sacrifice resonate more powerfully. For us today, this historical example underscores the timeless importance of crafting a compelling personal narrative. Whether leading a nation, a team, or simply navigating daily life, how we present ourselves, the stories we tell visually and verbally about who we are, forms the bedrock of influence and connection. Lincoln's innovative use of emerging media reminds us that authenticity paired with strategic storytelling invites trust and opens hearts. As we reflect on how Lincoln contextualized his era and cultivated his public persona, we see early evidence of leadership that transcended traditional rhetoric. He embraced the tools of his time to build a lasting legacy of persuasion, a legacy grounded in a profound understanding of the power of images and the narratives they carry. In the next segment, we will delve deeper into the pillars of Lincoln's persuasive leadership, his masterful storytelling, rigorous logic, and deep empathy that underpinned his remarkable ability to unite a nation. But for now, remember this essential lesson. The stories we share about ourselves, through words and images alike, are the gateway to effective persuasion and lasting influence. Lincoln's era may have been different, but his use of media to shape identity remains extraordinarily relevant for leaders today. Abraham Lincoln's remarkable effectiveness as a leader in one of America's most turbulent eras was no accident, but rather the product of a distinctive and powerful blend of storytelling, logic, and empathy, a triad that formed the very pillars of his persuasive leadership. To truly appreciate how Lincoln moved a fractured nation toward unity and justice, it's essential to explore how these elements shaped his communication style and influenced his ability to connect with diverse audiences. Storytelling was one of Lincoln's most potent tools. Far from being mere entertainment or diversion, his use of anecdotes and parables served to reframe complex and emotionally charged moral issues into narratives that were approachable and relatable. During his legal career, as he stood before judges and juries, Lincoln honed this skill, recognizing that people grasp ideas best when woven into stories they can visualize and emotionally engage with. For instance, his famous parable, The Wolf and the Sheep, which he delivered in an April 1864 speech in Baltimore, brilliantly encapsulated two contrasting definitions of liberty. Lincoln described liberty as either the freedom to do as one pleases with oneself and one's labor, the sheep's perspective, or the freedom to impose one's will on others, represented by the wolf. This simple yet profound story reframed the complicated and highly contentious issue of slavery in terms that bypassed immediate defenses and anger. It invited listeners to reflect thoughtfully rather than react emotionally, offering a shared mental framework where the moral injustices of slavery became clear in a new light. Lincoln's storytelling mastery extended beyond isolated parables. He deftly used stories to diffuse tension during difficult conversations or to politely sidestep direct confrontation. Anecdotes such as the farmer who killed a dog with a pitchfork to illustrate folly, or the tale of the chickens accustomed to frequent moves, the adage, 3 removes are worse than a fire, were memorable markers within his rhetoric. These narratives humanized him, made his points linger in the public mind, and fostered an environment where audiences could consider perspectives without feeling attacked. In essence, Lincoln's stories acted as a safety valve, helping to channel and manage the intense emotions swirling around issues like the Civil War and slavery, turning volatile discourse into productive reflection. Complementing his storytelling was Lincoln's rigorous use of logic, shaped by his extensive legal background. He was not merely a man of emotion or moral appeal. He was a consummate reasoner who constructed arguments with clarity and precision. The Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858 serve as a prime example. In these prolonged public engagements, Lincoln took on the formidable challenge of countering Stephen Douglas's advocacy for popular sovereignty with logical premises grounded in moral conviction that a nation divided by slavery could not endure. His famous house divided metaphor crystallized a foundational logical argument, presenting the nation's internal conflict as unsustainable and threatening the ideals upon which it was founded. Perhaps nowhere is Lincoln's mastery of logical persuasion more evident than in his Gettysburg Address. Though brief, the speech exudes methodical legal reasoning dressed in powerful rhetoric. Lincoln skillfully employed the classical modes of persuasion, ethos, pathos, and logos to justify the sacrifices being made during the war. He laid out a logical structure akin to a legal argument. He stated the nation's founding principles, identified the Civil War as a test of those principles, and issued a solemn charge to continue the fight in honor of those who had fallen. The repeated use of demonstrative words like this and here knit the speech's ideas tightly together, reinforcing its logical flow while connecting abstract ideals to the tangible battlefield. His ability to elevate the Civil War's purpose beyond mere territorial preservation to fulfilling the Declaration of Independence's promise of equality was a masterstroke of both moral vision and logical reframing. At the heart of Lincoln's persuasive power, however, was his deep empathy, an extraordinary capacity to understand and share the feelings of others, even those who opposed him. His communication was never delivered from a place of arrogance or condescension, but was marked by humility and a commitment to speak plainly and simply to common people. Lincoln's deliberate choice to avoid long flowery prose in favor of clear language made his messages accessible and heartfelt, a powerful contributor to his mass appeal. This approach built trust among a diverse citizenry, inviting them into a shared conversation rather than dictating from above. This empathy extended beyond style into strategy. Lincoln was acutely attuned to public sentiment, recognizing that winning hearts and minds was crucial to leadership. He carefully listened to concerns and fears, responding through public letters and speeches that communicated straightforwardly and respectfully. Notably, he avoided direct attacks on critics, instead using facts and reasoned argument to reposition conversations and defuse hostility. His habit of demonstrating sympathy even toward adversaries allowed him to forecast their moves and craft responses that anticipated objections, reducing polarizing conflicts before they escalated. Lincoln's empathy also led him to highlight shared values and experiences, often reminding audiences that despite profound divisions, North and South alike read the same Bible and pray to the same God. This framing helped build bridges, emphasizing common humanity even when political and ideological battles raged fiercely. Lincoln's inclination to personally grant passes to family members of Confederate soldiers, granting them grace despite official suspicion, illustrates how empathy informed not just his words but his actions. The life lesson from Lincoln's persuasive leadership is clear. Storytelling, logic, and empathy are not isolated tactics but interconnected pillars that sustain lasting influence. Storytelling creates common ground where complex issues become relatable and less threatening. Logic provides clarity and solid footing for arguments, anchoring emotion in reason. Empathy builds trust, opens channels of communication, and transforms opposition into dialogue. For modern leaders and communicators, embracing this triad offers a pathway through conflict and confusion toward understanding and unity. In practical terms, this means learning to craft narratives that invite reflection, not confrontation. grounding one's position in clear reasoning while remaining sensitive to the audience's perspective, and approaching all speakers, supporters, and opponents alike with humility and genuine care. By weaving these elements together, as Lincoln did so masterfully, we can reduce conflict, shape public opinion, and inspire collective action in any context, whether political, organizational, or personal. As we close this exploration of Lincoln's persuasive pillars, consider how your own communication habits might benefit from his approach. Are your stories helping bridge gaps? Is your logic clear and compelling? Do you listen with empathy and speak to, not above, your audience? The legacy of Abraham Lincoln reminds us that leadership is not about domination but connection, not about winning arguments but winning understanding. And in today's world, these lessons are as vital as ever. Mastery of logic in action. Debates and addresses. When we think of Abraham Lincoln, his towering presence as president during the Civil War immediately comes to mind. But more than just a symbol of the era, Lincoln was a master of legal reasoning and logical persuasion, qualities that he wielded with remarkable skill in moments that defined both his legacy and the nation's trajectory. Today, we dive deep into these pivotal moments, the Lincoln-Douglas debates and the Gettysburg Address, to explore how his rigorous application of logic combined with ethical appeal not only justified the immense sacrifices of the Civil War, but also redefined its very purpose and elevated the ideals of the young nation. Let's start with the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858. These were more than just exchanges between two political rivals. They were a clash of ideas at the heart of America's most divisive issue, slavery. Lincoln, with his extensive legal background, brought the precision and structure of a seasoned trial attorney to the public stage. He faced Stephen A. Douglas, who championed popular sovereignty, the idea that each territory should decide for itself whether to allow slavery. Lincoln's response was methodical and profound. He invoked the biblical adage, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," presenting as a clear premise the unsustainability of a nation split between free and slave states. From this premise, Lincoln built his logical argument. Allowing slavery to spread would erode the moral foundation of the nation and undermine the principles of liberty and equality enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. His argument was not just legalistic but deeply moral, creating a bridge between strict reasoning and ethical appeal. He effectively challenged Douglas's stance by demonstrating that the expansion of slavery was not merely a political question but an existential threat to the nation's core values. Lincoln's style in these debates embodied classical logic, beginning with clear premises, moving through structured reasoning, and arriving at inescapable conclusions. But what made his logic especially powerful was his ability to weave these arguments with ethical imperatives that resonated with the audience's sense of justice and humanity. This delicate balance refined the art of persuasion, asserting truth through both reason and moral clarity. Fast forward to the Gettysburg Address, a masterclass in concise yet profound legal rhetoric. In just about 250 words, Lincoln transformed the narrative of the Civil War. He opened with a succinct statement of facts, the founding of the nation based on the principle that all men are created equal. This served as the major premise for his argument. The minor premise was the reality of the war, the ongoing battle testing whether such a nation could endure. From these premises, Lincoln arrived at a powerful conclusion. It was the duty of the living to consecrate the battlefield by dedicating themselves to the unfinished work of preserving a government of the people, by the people, for the people. In crafting this address, Lincoln demonstrated immense mastery over the modes of persuasion identified by Aristotle: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos came through his own character and authority as leader. Pathos was evoked by the emotional weight of sacrifice. And logos was embodied in the logical progression of ideas. Lincoln understood how deeply the audience needed a reasoned justification for the grievous loss of life. By embedding the war's trials within a framework of shared values, he gave purpose and dignity to the soldiers' sacrifices, elevating the conflict from mere political strife to a test of the nation's commitment to equality and liberty. A notable rhetorical technique Lincoln employed was what scholars term backstitching, repetition of demonstrative pronouns such as this, that, and here. This device created a cohesive flow and reinforced connections between ideas, knitting the argument tightly together and making it easier for listeners to follow and internalize. Through this elegant pattern, abstract ideals became tangible and immediate, embodied by the hallowed ground where the soldiers fought and died. An extraordinary legal challenge Lincoln confronted was reconciling the Constitution's explicit protection of slavery with his moral opposition to the institution and his goal of abolition. He navigated this tension by invoking a higher law, the natural rights enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the law of nature articulated by legal scholars like Blackstone. This framework allowed him to argue that human laws, including the Constitution, should not violate fundamental moral truths. This clever reinterpretation reframed the Civil War not just as a political struggle to preserve the Union, but as a profound moral crusade to fulfill the nation's founding promise of equality for all its citizens. What can modern leaders learn from Lincoln's mastery of logic in these moments? First, he exemplifies the power of building arguments rooted in clear, logical premises that speak to universal values. His success lay not just in appealing to facts or law, but in connecting those facts to an ethical vision that inspired action. Second, his use of structured, repetitive rhetorical techniques crafted messages that were memorable, emotionally resonant, and logically compelling, principles that remain cornerstones of effective persuasion today. Lincoln's speeches and debates remind us that leadership communication is not merely about asserting opinions, but about offering well-reasoned, ethically grounded narratives that redefine purpose and invite collective commitment. By combining sharp legal reasoning with deep moral appeal, he was able to justify immense sacrifice, unify a fractured citizenry, and elevate the nation's ideals to new heights. In this blend of rigorous logic and heartfelt ethics, Lincoln set a timeless standard, one that shows us how carefully crafted arguments, when aligned with our most deeply held values, can move nations and inspire lasting change. As we reflect on these enduring lessons, we come to appreciate not only Lincoln's skill as a lawyer and orator, but his profound ability to employ reason as a bridge to moral clarity and unity. From the profound debates that challenged the nation's conscience to the stirring words on Gettysburg's solemn fields, Abraham Lincoln's mastery of logic in action remains a beacon for those seeking to lead with both intellect and integrity. As we move forward, keep this in mind. The most powerful persuasion arises from arguments that are not just sound in reason but rich in purpose, building not only understanding but inspiring the courage to act. Thus concludes our exploration of Lincoln's legalistic and logical prowess demonstrated in two of his most iconic moments. Next, we will journey into his extraordinary ability to connect empathetically with diverse audiences, a skill that beautifully complemented his mastery of logic and expanded his influence across a divided nation. Stay with us as we uncover this vital dimension of Lincoln's enduring leadership. In times of division, the challenge for any leader is not simply to speak but to truly connect, to bridge the gaps between deeply held, often conflicting beliefs and bring people into a space of understanding. Abraham Lincoln's extraordinary ability to empathize with a broad spectrum of viewpoints, including those that stood in opposition to his own, lies at the heart of his masterful approach to persuasion. This gift was no accident but a deliberate and practiced art, intertwined with a profound respect for the people he addressed and a commitment to clear, accessible communication. Lincoln understood something crucial about leadership: that persuasion is not about overpowering others with rhetoric or intellect, but about meeting people where they are, recognizing their fears, hopes, and values, and speaking in a language they can grasp and trust. He consistently shunned the ornate, lofty prose favored by many politicians of his day, choosing instead plain, simple words aimed squarely at the common person. This was a strategic move, designed to both foster understanding and to demonstrate humility. By speaking in ways that everyday Americans could easily understand, Lincoln built a sense of shared experience and common purpose. The Gettysburg Address, with its economy of words, 202 out of its 271 words are single syllables, stands as a testament to this commitment. Its power lies not in complexity, but in heartfelt simplicity. But empathy in Lincoln's case was far more than choosing understandable words. It was an active, intentional practice of listening and imagining the perspectives of others, even those who vehemently opposed him. He maintained what historians call a small d Democrat's sense of humility, tuning his ear closely to the pulse of public sentiment and treating it as a force more powerful than any law or decree. His remarkable capacity to forecast his opponent's moves came from his deep compassion and acute political sensitivity. He often acted just to take a pain out of his own mind, showing genuine personal care for individuals regardless of politics, even rescuing a pig stuck in a mire as an expression of kindness. When addressing the nation's divisions, Lincoln framed his message with respect and dignity, avoiding direct attacks or condescension toward critics and dissenters. Instead of responding to harsh critics with bitterness or defensiveness, he used facts and reasoned arguments to reposition debates and reshape narratives. One striking example was his public letter to Horace Greeley, a prominent abolitionist who had criticized Lincoln's cautious approach to emancipation. Instead of ignoring or attacking Greeley, Lincoln responded thoughtfully on the editorial pages, clarifying his intentions with humility and patience. By refusing to criticize detractors, Lincoln preserved lines of communication and prevented polarization from hardening further. This approach underscores an essential lesson. Empathy and active listening are transformative for leaders because they build trust, open channels for dialogue, and soften hostility. When people feel heard and respected, even difficult messages, like calls for sacrifice or shifts in policy, are far more likely to be received constructively. Lincoln's humility shone through not just in words but in practice. He granted pardons generously, often accepting the stories of Confederate families with grace, fully aware that the war battered the humanity of all sides. Lincoln's use of public letters and speeches also reveals his strategic commitment to molding public opinion with humility and clarity. Recognizing the influential role of newspapers, he harnessed them not to dominate but to engage, to speak directly to citizens and shape conversation with transparent intentions. This openness fostered a sense of shared journey, allowing Lincoln to lead by persuasion rather than decree. His efforts made the political process feel accessible and participatory rather than exclusive or intimidating. From Lincoln's example, modern leaders can derive actionable insights on how to connect empathetically with diverse audiences. First, simplicity in language is not a sign of weakness but of respect and clarity. Leaders need to avoid jargon, dense rhetoric, or elitist tones that alienate and instead speak plainly, ensuring their message is truly understood by everyone, from the highest offices to the everyday person on the street. Second, empathy should be a continuous practice of listening actively, seeking to understand not just positions but the emotions and motivations behind them. This empathetic attitude allows leaders to anticipate concerns and tailor messages that resonate on a human level, building trust over time. Moreover, leaders should resist the impulse to dismiss or demonize opposition. Instead, employing facts gently and reframing arguments respectfully leads to less defensive, more open interactions. Showing humility, acknowledging the validity of others' experiences, even when disagreeing, creates a foundation for dialogue rather than division. This approach can transform adversaries into allies or at least reduce hostility enough to enable cooperation and reconciliation. At a time when public discourse often feels fractured, Lincoln's example reminds us that empathic connection is not a soft skill but a strategic and moral imperative. It is through this connection that leaders build the trust needed to unite communities, guide them through difficult transitions, and inspire shared commitment to a greater cause. Lincoln's legacy instructs us that the power of persuasion flows from the combination of heartfelt empathy, plain-spoken clarity, and unwavering respect for the dignity of every listener. As we reflect on this vital pillar of Lincoln's persuasive leadership, we prepare to explore how he navigated conflict and conversation with strategic calm and grace, transforming polarization into dialogue and opposition into understanding. Empathy was not merely a personal virtue for Lincoln, it was the very bridge that made unity possible. It is through this bridge that we continue to find enduring lessons for leadership in our own divided times. Conflict and difficult conversations are inevitable in any leadership role. How one manages these moments often determines the strength and unity of the team, organization, or nation involved. Abraham Lincoln, during one of the most polarized and tumultuous periods in American history, offered a masterclass in navigating dissent and discord with a blend of emotional intelligence, strategic empathy, and unwavering responsibility. Lincoln understood deeply that managing conflict was not about winning arguments or crushing opposition, but about maintaining dialogue and preserving relationships to keep the broader mission intact. One of his key strategies was to avoid personal resentment. In his view, taking disagreements personally or allowing frustration to fester only clouded judgment and hindered progress. Instead, he approached differing opinions as necessary tensions that could be transformed into productive conversations if handled with patience and composure. Rather than responding defensively or with anger, Lincoln reframed negative arguments by grounding his responses in facts and broader principles. This approach allowed him to reposition debates away from emotional standoffs toward reasoned discussion. By focusing on shared realities instead of personal attacks, he de-escalated hostility and fostered a more open environment for discourse. Lincoln's commitment to facts and evidence ensured that even conflicting parties could find a common footing from which to build understanding. Interestingly, Lincoln also encouraged disagreement within his own team, recognizing that dissent was not a sign of weakness but a tool for strengthening decisions. He actively fostered an environment where his subordinates felt safe to express opposing views, knowing that this error-checking was crucial to avoid blind spots and improve the quality of his leadership. This cultural openness to challenge was groundbreaking for its time and remains a vital lesson for leaders today. Inviting constructive dissent not only sharpens ideas but also increases buy-in and collaboration. Another hallmark of Lincoln's conflict navigation was his readiness to personally take responsibility when things went wrong. Rather than shifting blame or punishing others, he absorbed accountability, which not only preserved morale but also modeled humility and integrity. This principle of shared accountability helped cultivate trust and unity, even in the face of setbacks or failures. His leadership demonstrated that embracing fault is not a weakness but a strength that builds credibility and resilience. One modern technique inspired by Lincoln's style, often referred to as the Lincoln email method, brilliantly encapsulates his principles of self-regulation, empathy, and thoughtful reflection before responding in tense situations. The process involves 3 steps. First, writing down one's raw frustration privately to process emotions. Second, adding empathetic and self-effacing statements to acknowledge the other person's perspective and one's own role in the situation. And third, reviewing the message after a cooling-off period while imagining oneself as the recipient. This technique, grounded in neuroscience and emotional intelligence, helps transform conflict from impulsive reaction to considerate dialogue, mirroring how Lincoln maintained control over his responses amid immense pressure. At the heart of all these strategies lies Lincoln's extraordinary capacity for empathy. He consistently emphasized shared humanity even with adversaries, such as reminding the divided nation that North and South both read the same Bible and pray to the same God. This empathetic mindset fostered psychological safety, reducing defensiveness and opening space for reconciliation. Lincoln's ability to take a walk in your rival's shoes helped him to anticipate concerns, address fears, and craft messages that resonated beyond partisan lines. Taken together, these approaches created an environment conducive to constructive dialogue and consensus building in even the most contested situations. Lincoln's leadership was not about silencing differences but managing them in ways that preserved relationships, encouraged collaboration, and advanced shared goals. His example teaches us that navigating conflict successfully requires self-awareness, emotional regulation, humility, and a commitment to engagement rather than avoidance or escalation. For listeners today, the practical takeaways from Lincoln's approach are clear and actionable. First, avoid letting personal resentment color your responses in disagreements. See conflict as an opportunity for growth instead of a personal attack. Second, reframe negative arguments by grounding your responses in facts and shared principles rather than emotion. Third, foster a culture where dissent is welcomed and encouraged for better decision-making. Fourth, take responsibility openly when things go wrong to build trust and model integrity. And finally, practice self-regulation and empathy in heated exchanges, perhaps by adapting the Lincoln email technique to ensure your communication remains thoughtful and constructive. By integrating these principles into our own leadership and daily interactions, we can transform difficult conversations from roadblocks into avenues for deeper understanding and meaningful progress. Lincoln's legacy reminds us that conflict need not divide. It can be a forge where stronger unity is built through respect, accountability, and shared commitment. As we move forward in this episode, we will continue to explore how Lincoln used the art of framing to craft compelling narratives that shape collective identity and purpose. Understanding how he skillfully molded both conflict management and message framing offers us powerful lessons in effective leadership communication. The journey through Lincoln's life equips us not just to persuade others, but to do so with humility, empathy, and enduring impact. In the art of leadership, perhaps no skill is more potent than the ability to frame a message in a way that not only communicates but shapes reality itself. Abraham Lincoln understood this deeply. He didn't just speak words. He crafted narratives that anchored abstract principles into the lived experiences of a nation torn asunder. His attention to language, his deliberate choice of words, and his mastery of narrative framing transformed the meaning of the Civil War from a mere struggle for territory into a defining moral crusade, forging a collective identity that helped unite a profoundly divided America. Take, for example, one of his most iconic speeches, the Gettysburg Address. In just a few brief minutes and fewer than 300 carefully chosen words, Lincoln managed to encapsulate the immense human sacrifice at Gettysburg and elevate it into a sacred moment in the nation's journey. His deliberate repetition of words like "here," used 8 times, anchored lofty ideals to the concrete reality of the battlefield. This was no accidental rhetorical flourish, but a strategic grounding of abstract ideals like liberty and equality in the tangible, hallowed ground where blood had been spilled. By repeating "here," "this," and "that," Lincoln created a sense of immediacy and solemn connection between listeners and the sacrifices that had been made, making the message resonate deeply and memorably. Furthermore, the Gettysburg Address uses honorific language, words like nobly, devotion, hallow, and consecrate, that evoke reverence and solemnity, reminding listeners that the struggle was not just political or military but profoundly sacred. This elevated the war's purpose far beyond the fight to hold the Union together. It became a moral mandate to fulfill the promise embedded in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. Through this framing, Lincoln didn't just justify the immense loss of life, he gave it meaning. He made the war about a shared national ideal that transcended regional divisions and personal grievances, uniting disparate groups under a common vision of freedom and equality. The power of Lincoln's framing is also evident in his famous House Divided speech. Here, he presented a stark, memorable metaphor, asserting that a house divided against itself cannot stand. This phrase framed the conflict not as a mere political disagreement but as a fundamental crisis of national survival. Such a vivid image allowed citizens to grasp the unsustainable nature of a nation split by slavery. By linking the idea of division to the concept of inevitable collapse, Lincoln appealed to a shared human understanding of stability and order. This framing compelled Americans to confront the moral and practical implications of their choices, prompting reflection on what kind of nation they wished to be. What makes Lincoln's narrative framing especially noteworthy is how he rooted abstract ideals in relatable, concrete experiences. He understood that ideas like liberty, equality, and unity can be intellectual concepts floating far from personal relevance unless they are connected to the lived realities people recognize and value. By linking these ideals to the very soil of the battlefield or the stability of a household, Lincoln made them accessible and urgent. This technique helped his audiences internalize complex moral imperatives by experiencing them through familiar images and everyday understandings. Another important element of Lincoln's framing was his meticulous care with language. He agonized over word choice, rewrote passages numerous times, and tailored his messages specifically for his audience rather than for his own ego. This sensitivity to how language shapes public perception was a strategic mastery, recognizing that words do more than convey facts, they shape how people think and feel about those facts. Lincoln's writing and speaking were always precise, intentionally chosen to maximize emotional and intellectual resonance. His use of simple, direct language made monumental ideas clear and accessible, ensuring his message could unite ordinary citizens as well as political leaders. The practical lesson here for today's leaders is profound. Language is not a passive tool for communication. It is an active instrument for shaping reality and identity. Leaders who can frame messages powerfully have the ability to redefine the meaning of events and create a shared vision that inspires collective action. Lincoln's example teaches us that framing is about more than just words. It is about forging new narratives that connect deeply with people's values and experiences, guiding them toward a common purpose even in turbulent times. To apply Lincoln's framing lessons today, leaders should focus on anchoring their messages in tangible, shared experiences, using language that evokes respect and shared values. Repetition of key words or themes, when done thoughtfully, can reinforce ideas and create cohesion across diverse audiences. Leaders should also be deliberate and patient with their word choice, editing carefully with their audience's perspective in mind rather than their own preferences. This approach builds trust and clarity, ensuring the message does not get lost or misunderstood. Moreover, reframing contentious issues with compelling metaphors or vivid images helps audiences grasp complex or uncomfortable realities in a way that opens pathways to dialogue and understanding. Rather than confronting opposing views directly, framing can move people gently but firmly toward recognizing a shared destiny or common ground. Lincoln's art of framing did more than just communicate policy or rally troops. It reshaped how an entire nation saw itself and its purpose. It laid the foundation for a new collective identity centered on liberty and unity. For leaders facing division, conflict, or profound change, this lesson, that narrative framing is a strategic tool for shaping collective reality, is invaluable. As we reflect on Lincoln's mastery, let us recognize that effective leadership communication demands more than passion or logic alone. It requires the artful crafting of a narrative that resonates emotionally and intellectually, is rooted in shared experience, and elevates a group's understanding of who they are and what they stand for. This is the power of framing, a lesson from Lincoln that remains essential for anyone seeking to inspire and unite. In the following segments, we will explore how Lincoln deployed these narrative strategies alongside empathy, storytelling, and logic to navigate the immense challenges of the Civil War and leave a lasting legacy of persuasive leadership. For now, let this section's insights into the art of framing inspire you to consider how you might craft and communicate your own messages, whether in leadership, community, or daily life, with the same careful attention and strategic purpose that so distinguished Lincoln's enduring words. In the crucible of the American Civil War, the stakes could scarcely have been higher. The nation was torn apart not only by the clash of armies, but by profound moral and political divisions so deep that the very unity of the United States was in question. Yet, it was in this most volatile context that Abraham Lincoln's masterful persuasion was tested, refined, and ultimately proved indispensable. Through detailed case studies of his leadership during this critical period, we can witness how Lincoln's flexible and pragmatic approach to persuasion, an intricate balance of caution, conciliation, decisiveness, and, when necessary, force, allowed him to navigate an unprecedented national crisis. One of the most daunting challenges Lincoln faced was managing the border states, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, each of which occupied a precarious position. These were slave states that had not seceded but harbored significant Confederate sympathies. Their loyalty was vital to the Union's survival, making Lincoln's success here a matter of national fate. Maryland offers a prime example of Lincoln's nuanced, multi-layered persuasion strategy. After the violent Baltimore riot early in the war, Lincoln initially exercised caution and conciliation by agreeing to a temporary halt on sending more troops into the state. Yet this temporary leniency was strategic rather than indulgent. When it became clear that stronger measures were necessary to secure Maryland's allegiance, Lincoln authorized the suspension of habeas corpus, the right to a speedy trial, which allowed for the arrest and detention of individuals without immediate judicial oversight. This controversial but resolute decision reflected his understanding that preserving the Union was paramount and sometimes required unprecedented actions. Alongside this, a massive military presence was established to maintain order and subtly shift public opinion toward the Union cause. Throughout this process, Lincoln carefully steered between political factions within Maryland, ensuring that Unionists maintained the upper hand. This balance of force, legal measures, and political savvy exemplifies how Lincoln's persuasion was not about blunt coercion but about calibrated, context-sensitive leadership. Kentucky's situation was even more delicate. Lincoln recognized its stronger secessionist leanings and approached the state with extreme caution. Unlike Maryland, where he deployed military force relatively early, in Kentucky Lincoln respected its declared neutrality to avoid pushing it irrevocably into the Confederate camp. Yet behind the scenes, he acted decisively by secretly arming Union supporters to safeguard Loyalist interests. He also intervened in military orders that might have alienated Kentucky further, notably revoking General Fremont's unauthorized Emancipation Proclamation, which threatened to fracture Kentucky's delicate balance. Even with this careful approach, tensions eventually led Lincoln to impose martial law later in the war. The Kentucky case reveals how persuasion in high-stakes conflict involves subtle, sometimes covert strategies, balancing respect for local politics with behind-the-scenes actions committed to a broader unity. Missouri proved the greatest challenge. Here Lincoln's policies achieved the least success. The state was engulfed in internal warfare, bitter political factionalism, and chaotic violence on its frontier borders. Early Union leadership missteps, such as General Fremont's unauthorized emancipation order and incompetence, exacerbated division and eroded public trust. Missouri's turmoil illustrates the limits of even Lincoln's persuasive genius when confronted by deeply entrenched local chaos and weak on-the-ground leadership. This sobering lesson shows that persuasion, no matter how skillful, can falter without effective implementation and local support. Beyond the border states, Lincoln also had to navigate the turbulent waters of internal dissent, particularly from groups like the Copperheads, a faction of Northern Democrats vehemently opposed to the war. To manage this political polarization, Lincoln employed a strategy marked by pragmatism and restraint. The suspension of habeas corpus, first in Maryland and then extended nationwide, was among his most controversial moves. It allowed for the arrest and detention of individuals suspected of disloyalty without trial, a decision that raised constitutional questions but was deemed necessary to suppress violent protests, sabotage, and attempts at insurrection. Lincoln defended this as a temporary and painful sacrifice of certain civil liberties to preserve the Union and its long-term legal framework. At the same time, Lincoln maintained a surprising degree of conciliation toward political opponents. His treatment of Congressman Clement L. Vallandigham, a leading Copperhead, underscores this. When Vallandigham was convicted by a military tribunal for expressing anti-war views, Lincoln commuted his sentence to exile rather than imprisonment. Similarly, when a hostile newspaper was suppressed by military order, Lincoln promptly revoked that action. His deliberate avoidance of personalizing politics was encapsulated in his statement, "If any man ceases to attack me, I never remember the past against him." This magnanimity and refusal to demonize opponents helped to reduce bitterness and kept the channels of dialogue from closing entirely, a vital aspect of maintaining national cohesion during crisis. Perhaps the most transformative and defining demonstration of Lincoln's persuasive leadership was the Emancipation Proclamation and the subsequent push for the 13th Amendment. Initially, Lincoln was cautious about emancipation, mindful of constitutional doubts, the challenge of integrating millions of freed slaves, and the necessity of retaining border state loyalty. His paramount goal remained saving the Union, even if that meant freeing no slaves at all. But as the war progressed and the human and moral stakes became clearer, Lincoln's position evolved into one of principled pragmatic idealism. He justified the Emancipation Proclamation as an exercise of his war powers, a strategic and symbolic act that transformed the war's purpose from solely preserving the Union to a broader struggle for human freedom. This bold proclamation altered the moral and diplomatic landscape of the conflict. It discouraged foreign intervention on behalf of the Confederacy, energized abolitionists, and redefined the war as a fight for liberty and justice. Recognizing its constitutional limitations as a permanent legal measure, Lincoln then engaged in relentless persuasion within Congress to secure the 13th Amendment, which would permanently abolish slavery. His re-election in 1864 was interpreted as a popular mandate for this cause. Lincoln's combination of legal reasoning, moral vision, and political patronage led to the amendment's eventual passage, cementing a long-term transformation of American society. The progression from cautious calculation to decisive moral leadership demonstrates Lincoln's willingness to adapt, evolve, and embrace higher principles when circumstances allowed, exemplifying a hallmark of flexible and strategic persuasion. Lastly, Lincoln's plans for reunification after the war reveal yet another layer of his pragmatic persuasion. His proclamation of amnesty and Reconstruction offered remarkably lenient terms for rejoining the Union, including full pardon for most Confederates and fast-track re-entry for states once 10% of voters swore allegiance. He counseled the nation to accept imperfect beginnings, focusing on incremental progress rather than immediate perfection. In advocating limited suffrage for African Americans deemed very intelligent or Union veterans, Lincoln balanced new ideals with political pragmatism. This conciliatory vision reflected his overarching belief that the nation's healing required generosity, patience, and a focus on common ground rather than punitive retribution. Through these case studies, the delicate management of border states, the restrained handling of dissenters, the transformative emancipation policies, and the tempered post-war reunification plans, Abraham Lincoln's persuasion reveals itself as a deeply multifaceted art. It is rooted not in rigid ideology or brute force alone, but in a complex interplay of empathy, logic, moral courage, adaptability, and the judicious use of authority. Lincoln's leadership teaches us that persuading a divided community in times of crisis demands a toolkit as broad and flexible as the challenges faced: the patience to conciliate, the firmness to enforce order, the vision to inspire, and the humility to listen and adjust. For modern leaders grappling with division, uncertainty, and competing interests, Lincoln's example offers a guiding blueprint. It shows that leadership and persuasion are not about simplistic, one-size-fits-all formulas but require nuanced understanding of context, the willingness to blend compassion with strength, and the courage to evolve principles in pursuit of a unifying vision. The legacy of these Civil War case studies is a profound reminder that persuasion in high-stakes, fractured environments is an art as much as a science, an art that demands both heart and mind, patience and decisiveness, and an unwavering commitment to a greater cause. As we transition from this exploration of Lincoln's practical leadership challenges and dynamic persuasion in action, we invite you to carry forward these lessons of flexibility, empathy, and strategic resolve. They not only illuminate a critical chapter in American history but also serve as enduring tools for anyone seeking to inspire unity and forge progress in today's complex world. When we examine the towering figure of Abraham Lincoln, we are not only looking at a historical icon but also at an enduring model of leadership whose lessons resonate far beyond the 19th century. In drawing together the comprehensive mosaic of his life and leadership during America's gravest crisis, we uncover an intricate tapestry woven from compassion, courage, perseverance, integrity, empathy, humor, self-awareness, and adaptability. These are not mere traits but timeless principles that defined Lincoln's way of leading, principles that remain profoundly actionable for leaders and individuals today. Lincoln's leadership was grounded first and foremost in his exceptional personal character. His compassion was not a soft, passive feeling but an active force driving his decisions. He empathized deeply with both the suffering of enslaved people and the fears of a divided nation. This empathy allowed him to understand the perspectives of adversaries and allies alike, enabling him to communicate in ways that build bridges rather than walls. His courage was similarly remarkable, making difficult decisions like issuing the Emancipation Proclamation despite enormous political risk and uncertainty. The perseverance he demonstrated, pressing forward through personal grief, national bloodshed, and political turmoil, teaches us the vital importance of steadfastness to a vision grounded in justice and unity. Integrity was the cornerstone of how Lincoln was perceived and how he governed. Unlike many who might have stooped to divisive tactics or empty rhetoric, Lincoln's simple honesty carried conviction. He won trust not by grandstanding but through consistent truthfulness and fairness. This integrity was coupled with humility. He was known for encouraging disagreement among his advisors, welcoming dissent as a critical error-checking mechanism. This self-awareness, an understanding not only of his own limitations but of the need for diverse input, allowed for adaptive leadership that could pivot in the face of new evidence or shifting circumstances. Humor and humanity were perhaps lesser known but equally important facets of his leadership that helped him carry immense burdens without being consumed by them. Known for ribald jokes and storytelling, Lincoln utilized humor as a safety valve not only for relieving stress but also for creating connections. This blend of seriousness with lightness allowed him to be approachable and relatable even at the highest office, fostering trust and lowering defenses. What made all these personal qualities truly powerful was Lincoln's mastery of communication, a seamless integration of character and craft. He understood that leadership is not merely about personal virtues, but also about the ability to convey vision persuasively and clearly. His communication was marked by empathy, speaking in plain and simple language that reached the common person without condescension. This approach of speaking for his audience, not his ego, ensured his message was accessible and heartfelt. Storytelling was a key tool Lincoln employed with finesse. He harnessed parables and anecdotes to frame complex and emotionally charged issues in relatable terms, enabling audiences to move beyond emotional backlash to thoughtful reflection. Stories like The Wolf and the Sheep allowed listeners to grasp the moral contours of liberty and slavery in a shared narrative form that engaged their imagination and empathy. For today's leaders, this highlights the profound power of narrative, not just to inform but to transform understanding and consensus. Lincoln's logical rigor was equally integral. His speeches and debates were carefully structured, grounded in undeniable facts, moral philosophy, and clear reasoning. The Gettysburg Address exemplifies this mastery. It distilled the purpose of the Civil War into a logical argument that linked the sacrifice of soldiers to the nation's founding ideals of equality and liberty. His ability to combine ethos, pathos, and logos, character, emotion, and logic, created arguments that were compelling not only intellectually but also morally and emotionally. This careful balance offers a blueprint for effective communication that engages the whole audience, not just their rational minds but their hearts and values as well. Equally noteworthy was Lincoln's strategic empathy, his ability to anticipate opponents' actions and fears and address them proactively with respect and humility. He never resorted to ad hominem attacks but repositioned the argument and the message with facts and dignity. This approach not only disarmed critics but also fostered a political environment more conducive to dialogue and progress. His famous Lincoln email technique of processing anger privately before articulating responses shows a leader committed to self-regulation and empathetic engagement, vital skills for anyone striving to manage conflict constructively. Underlying all of this was Lincoln's adaptability. With profound awareness of context and a willingness to experiment, he famously stated, "My policy is to have no policy," reflecting his pragmatic flexibility. Whether balancing caution and force to secure border states or evolving his stance from cautious unionism to moral abolitionism, Lincoln adjusted his methods as circumstances required without sacrificing his core principles. This blend of principled vision and tactical adaptability underscores that great leadership is not rigid but dynamically responsive, always anchored in values yet flexible in execution. So, what actionable lessons emerge from modern leaders and individuals? First, lead with empathy, truly understand the perspectives, fears, and hopes of others. This enables communication that resonates and conflicts that can be navigated with respect rather than rancor. Second, communicate clearly and simply. Cut through noise and complexity to speak messages that are accessible and heartfelt. Third, wield storytelling as a bridge-building tool to frame issues in relatable human terms that inspire reflection and unity. Fourth, build your arguments with rigorous logic and emotional resonance, grounding appeals in shared values and irrefutable facts. Fifth, cultivate humility and invite diverse viewpoints, fostering an environment where dissent is welcomed as a path to better decisions. Sixth, practice self-awareness and self-regulation. Manage your emotions before engaging others, ensuring interactions remain constructive. Seventh, embrace adaptability without losing sight of core principles, adjusting strategies as realities shift. Finally, don't underestimate the power of humor and humanity to connect and sustain both yourself and those you led through difficult times. Incorporating these lessons does more than enhance leadership effectiveness. It enriches everyday life, helping us communicate with loved ones, resolve conflicts, and inspire collective action amid division. Lincoln's example stands as a beacon not only in the political arena, but in any context where leadership and persuasion touch our shared human journey. As we reflect on Abraham Lincoln's enduring leadership qualities and communication mastery, we see a deeply integrated model where personal character and purposeful communication intertwine to shape profound influence. His legacy teaches us that leadership is ultimately about connection, with ideas, with values, and most importantly, with people. Embracing empathy, clarity, storytelling, logic, humility, and adaptability as interconnected practices provides a roadmap for anyone aspiring to lead, influence, and unite in our complex, often fragmented world. This concludes our exploration of enduring leadership lessons from Abraham Lincoln, a timeless guide to principled, compassionate, and effective leadership. As we transition into the final reflections on the timeless power of Lincoln's persuasion, we carry forward these principles as tools to inspire unity and progress in our own lives and communities. Abraham Lincoln's legacy is far more than the chapters of history that recount a nation divided and reunited. It is a living testament to the timeless power of persuasion and leadership that transcends the era in which he lived. Through immense trials that threatened to tear the United States apart, Lincoln emerged as a beacon of resilience, vision, and masterful communication, qualities that continue to hold profound meaning for us today. As we reflect on the story of Lincoln's life and leadership, we see a man who understood the deep importance of human connection in driving change. His extraordinary ability to empathize with diverse audiences, even those who opposed him, serves as a reminder that leadership rooted in compassion can bridge divides that seem insurmountable. He spoke in simple, clear language precisely to be understood by the common people, honoring their intelligence while never condescending to them. This humble but confident approach built trust and opened hearts, inviting collaboration rather than confrontation. Lincoln's mastery of storytelling also teaches us that sometimes the most complex moral dilemmas can be made accessible through narrative. His use of parables like the wolf and the sheep reframed heated debates about liberty and slavery into stories that engaged empathy and moral reflection instead of immediate resistance. In a world often consumed by division, his storytelling offers a powerful lesson that by sharing relatable stories, we can defuse hostility and craft a shared vision that inspires collective progress. His logical rigor and legal acumen were no less impressive. Lincoln knew that words carry weight when backed by reasoned argument and evidence. From the celebrated Lincoln-Douglas debates to the Gettysburg Address, his communication combined clarity of logic with emotional resonance. He articulated a higher vision for the nation that went beyond preserving territory to fulfilling the promise of equality and liberty embedded in the Declaration of Independence. This ability to frame messages in a way that connected ideals to lived experience is a crucial strategy that modern leaders can adopt to inspire purpose and unity. But perhaps Lincoln's greatest lesson lies in how he navigated conflict and difficult conversations. He modeled extraordinary emotional intelligence, managing personal feelings with self-control, avoiding resentment, encouraging dissenting views, and sharing responsibility for outcomes. His Lincoln email technique, a method of processing anger and then crafting empathetic responses, highlights the timeless value of self-regulation and perspective-taking in leadership. By fostering psychological safety and focusing on shared goals, Lincoln created a space where dialogue could flourish even amid bitter division. In bringing these threads together, Lincoln embodied virtues that remain essential for leaders and individuals seeking to make a difference today: compassion and courage to face hard truths, perseverance and adaptability in the face of setbacks, integrity to build lasting credibility, and above all, a commitment to communicating with care and clarity. He reminds us that effective leadership is not born from raw power or charisma alone, but from the synergy of character, communication, and principled vision. So what can we, as listeners and leaders in our own spheres, take away from Abraham Lincoln's timeless legacy? How can his example shape the way we engage with our communities, workplaces, and relationships? First, embrace empathy as a strategic and moral foundation. Seek to understand others deeply, not only to argue more effectively, but to genuinely connect. Practice listening with openness, putting yourself in the shoes of those who disagree, and approach conversations with humility. Second, communicate with clarity, simplicity, and storytelling that engages both the heart and mind. Craft your messages so they resonate with shared values and lived experiences. Use narrative to bridge gaps and invite reflection rather than division. Third, cultivate patience and self-awareness as tools for managing conflict. Learn to regulate your emotional responses, and when faced with disagreement, avoid blame and instead reposition arguments with facts and shared goals. Foster environments where dissent is welcomed as a means of strengthening decisions. Finally, hold fast to a principled vision that inspires hope and unity. Like Lincoln, lead with integrity and steadfastness, but remain adaptable and willing to refine your approach as circumstances evolve. Recognize that leadership is a dynamic journey requiring both conviction and flexibility. In closing, Abraham Lincoln's art of persuasion stands as a beacon not merely of historical achievement, but as an enduring guide for principled leadership and empathetic communication. His life challenges us to step beyond division, to embody resilience and vision, and to wield the power of words not for personal gain, but to unite, uplift, and advance progress for the common good. May we take inspiration from Lincoln's legacy to become leaders who listen deeply, speak clearly, and lead with courageous compassion. In doing so, we carry forward a tradition of timeless wisdom that remains as vital today as it was more than a century ago. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Abraham Lincoln's masterful influence. May the lessons gleaned here empower you to foster unity and progress in your personal and professional endeavors. Until next time, keep learning from the enduring legacies that shape our world.